Aku masukin semua ya pesertanya. Nanti silakan sampean aja yang mulai.
Hello, everyone. Good evening to our viewers in Indonesia, and good morning and afternoon to those join us from other part of the world. So, welcome to PRANKS, Project Management Sharing Knowledge series brought to you by PMI Indonesia chapter. My name is Rio Handoko. I am a program board member at PMI Indonesia chapter, and I will be your host today. On behalf of the PMI Indonesia and the chapter volunteers, I would like to extend our very warm welcome to our speaker and all the attendees tonight. If this is the first time for you to join the pranks, this is a regular event that we run twice a month, where we invite subject matter expert practitioners to share their knowledge, idea, and experience. If you would like to speak at our event, or if you have any suggestion for speaker that you would like us to host, to reach out to us through our website or social media channel. Tonight, our speaker, Pak Renaldi Gondosubroto, will sharing about the future-proofing project leveraging generative AI for automated scenario planning. I would like to introduce the profile our speaker. Pak Renaldi Gondosubroto currently as a software engineer at SIG. He is a PMP and SCP holder certified and AWS subject matter expert with 13 AWS certified. He graduated from the Columbia University, majoring Master of Science and then Bachelor of Science from the University of Melbourne. Hello, Pak Renaldi. Thank you for join with us as a speaker. Then before we start the session, I will inform about the rules. All the participants will be on mute and video will turn off. And for the question, please submit at the chat box. This session will be recorded. And for the certificate will be distributed to all the participants who join this session. And then for PMI Indonesia chapter member will get auto submission video. For the recording will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. Search for PMI Indonesia chapter, the YouTube channel. Happy learning and give us feedback. Then please, Pak Renaldi.
Thank you, Mas Rio, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. It's my second time speaking at PMI Indonesia, and yeah, always happy to pretty much come back and also come and pretty much share some insights. And yeah, as Mas Rio already introduced, I'm going to be talking about future-proofing projects leveraging generative AI for automated scenario planning. And so yeah, before we get into it, just wanted to pretty much reiterate a few more stuff about my introduction as well. So I think Masri already introduced quite a bit about the key points about myself, but some other stuff I think that I can also mention is I have personal fields of interest within cloud-based development as well and project management. My first talk that I did at PMI Indonesia was actually also about how project managers can utilize cloud-based services and develop cloud-based projects based on what they're currently working on. And on the sides, I also run meetups as well. I run hackathons, I do tech talks, and I'm a VR tech enthusiast. So what's the agenda going to be for today? It's going to start off with introduction to generative AI and automatic scenario planning. After that, we're going to go into a bit of discussion on synergy of Gen AI and ASP, which is automated scenario planning. After that, we're going to talk a bit about predictive analytics and risk assessment. And then we're going to talk about how we can create the flow for this particular project management using automated scenario planning and how to bring it to the firm. And after that, we're going to take a look at a bit of a case study that incorporates ASP. And if you want to ask any questions, please, I think the policy, Masario, is we put it in the chat, or and it's asked later, or... But yeah, we can pretty much take in questions and have it like answered later, pretty much at the end of the session. I'll open up for questions at the end of the session. So just a quick introduction to generative AI. Basically, I'm pretty sure that a lot of people in this room right now have already heard of technology such as ChatGPT or similar cases. For example, like Google has their own technology called Bard, for example, or Amazon, for example, has Amazon Bedrock. And it has really revolutionized a lot of things because it has been able to really help everyone, no matter their background, no matter their technical skills, to be able to access the benefits of artificial intelligence very easily. And is able to answer questions that you have very easily too. And in general, just putting a definition to move the concept forward is that it refers to algorithms that use statistical analysis to generate new data that resembles a given data set. And there are really three main core principles that govern it, which is the generation of new data instances, learning patterns from existing data, and the ability to produce realistic and coherent outputs. So these are three principles that Gen AI are based on. And it's a really big thing right now because a lot of people are finding out ways of how to be able to leverage them better for their own use cases and be able to utilize them for being able to increase the productivity of what they're doing in a lot of use cases. And it's going to be an even bigger thing for project managers as well, as we'll discuss soon too. So how has Gen AI moved and evolved throughout time? So early days, we were able to initially just focus on simple data generation. So one of the things that it was able to do at the start for project management was that it helped to be able to generate data and accordingly generate small bits of data from and interpolate based on that and provide small bits of analysis based on what we're currently providing it. So for example, say you're saying that you want to see based on these particular data points that you have for your project and the associated risks for your project, get a estimate scenario based on that and build a kind of graph based on that. So that was essentially the start of it all. And that would what I would say is the start of generative AI within project management. But now we have the emergence of new trends within project management, which actually are the emergence of models such as generative adversarial networks and variational autoencoders. So the best way to explain these two concepts is that for GANs, imagine two artists. One is like a forger trying to create paintings that look like they're from a famous artist, and the other is an art critic. So the forger creates a painting and the critic judges it. So if the painting is not convincing, the critic explains why it doesn't look like a genuine piece, and the forger uses this feedback to improve. Over time, the forger becomes so skilled that the critic can't tell the difference between the forgeries and real paintings. So in GANs, two networks are trained simultaneously. So one creates data while the other evaluates it. And hence the generator learns to be able to produce more realistic data while the discriminator becomes better at judging. On the other hand, with VAEs, it's like a skilled artist who takes a detailed scene and sketches a simple representation that captures the essence of that scene. Later, the artist uses the simple sketch to recreate the detailed scene from scratch. And the VAE is a neural network that compresses data into a simplified representation and then reconstructs it as closely as possible to the original. So it's useful for being able to compress data and reduce noise in general. So these advancements are what help us to be able to generate better high quality outputs based on the text that we feed it, and hence are able to provide more interpretations and generate more insights based on that, based on what we're creating it. And that's why we can do things such as risk analysis and schedule planning based on that too. And as part of that, we then have AI generated schedules, risk logs, and also the power to be able to estimate costs better as well, which is one of the things that is very important, as you know, for project managers. So there are quite a number of applications for Gen AI, as you already know by now. Generating, such as being able to generate images and videos, producing, including human-like text, and also being able to create synthetic data sets for being able to train models accordingly. So let's get into the heart of the topic of today, which is a bit of an introduction to automated scenario planning. So what is it? Well, ASP is more or less the automated generation and analysis of possible future scenarios to aid in decision making. So what we really want to get out of this is be able to use what we currently have, data, for example, for resources that we currently have, like the number of personnel that we have, the number of resources in terms of budgeting that we have, and be able to use this to be able to plan out the future workload that we need to be able to accomplish and how we can spread that out equally. And why is this important? Because it allows for more proactive management. You're able to take advantage of the resources you have better and be able to accordingly plan for future possibilities that way. And you can allocate your resources better, which ultimately leads to more informed decision making. And what's the difference between traditional ASP and AI enhanced ASP? So traditional methods have often been manual and time consuming. So previously we had to more or less put these kinds of things in spreadsheets, as you might have already know, and try to do your own calculations and try to generate insights on that based on reports that you generate as part of that. So AI, on the other hand, is able to enhance this by ensuring that what we do is accurate based on the numbers and the data that we have, and it is efficient. And its main benefit is that it's able to perform so in a very easy to use way, which I will also show in a bit too. With just the UI, we can essentially just perform this directly, and it's able to make real-time scenario adjustments based on that. So we can iteratively develop our scenario. We can say, all right, for example, say we want to put in this new data based on what one of our clients actually currently want. And we can put that in, and we can ask the AI to accordingly adopt the new adjustment and put it into our new model so that it can consider that next as part of the consideration. And overall, it can help us generate predictive analytics. So where does the synergy of generative AI and ASP fit in? It helps to automate process and generate insights that you would have to be doing previously manually. And you'll be able to do this easily with many generative AI interfaces in general. And one of the things that might not exactly come up directly within the project management context is selecting the appropriate AI tools and models. So as I mentioned before, ChatGPT, for example, is one such tool that a lot of organizations right now are already exploring the usage of and continually looking at how you can get the most out of. But there are also a lot of AI models out there, and some of the ones I mentioned before are, for example, from Google or Amazon. So as part of this, it's often up to the product manager to do your own research on this, but you need to be able to understand three things: the capabilities that you need as part of that, the cost that you need as part of that, and the current infrastructure you have. So some models are more friendlier than others, such as, for example, ChatGPT. You already have the ready-to-use interface, and I'm not sure if you've been looking at the GPT updates from a few days ago, but they've really ramped up what the capabilities can do from an easy to access way. So one of the ways that is very interesting, for example, is that you can just put in data directly into ChatGPT, and what it does is that it actually is able to directly create data analysis based on that. And run your calculations accordingly and output insights based on that, which is a very powerful thing as a project manager to have. You put your data inside, then you basically get it out. So I have a word of caution of that in terms of data privacy, which I think some people will want to touch on as well later. So I'll leave it to a later slide to be able to touch on that. And of course, with that, we are able to then make real-time adjustments with AI too. And these may involve changes in project parameters, which may affect the outcomes as well. So one of the things, for example, in these kinds of workloads is that you can also adjust how creative you want it to be, how based on facts you want it to be. And it can also help you as well in being able to make better decision making and better resource reallocation. And you can trigger it manually or automatically. So you can put it as part of a workflow, for example, to be able to generate new insights, or you could also just generate it on the go too. And as part of that, change management will be another thing that will eventually come to pass too as part of this journey. And as part of change management, the power of generative AI really comes from being able to forecast potential outcomes based on historical data and current project metrics. You're able to also analyze patterns and trends to be able to have better identification of project risks, which we will actually talk about in the next few slides as well. And you'll be able to optimize project performance accordingly. And with optimizing resource allocation, we want to be able to recommend different ways of allocating resources. We want to be able to show different ways of how resources can be distributed based on your use cases. For example, if you want it to be done in an optimistic way, or if you want it to be done in a more conservative way, it basically can provide appropriate responses on that. And this will really be able to help us also weigh against our current objectives and requirements. And it makes the process easier because you have the objectives, you have the generated insights, and you can compare them both and see if both aligns to each other and accordingly make decisions based on that. Because at the end of the day, you can't make decisions based solely on insights generated by the generative AI's recommendations. You also need to be able to ensure that this decision is most feasible and also makes sense within the current objectives that is provided to. And continuing building on the understanding, prompt engineering is another big thing that I feel a lot of project managers may have already encountered, but not really paid attention much to yet. But it's basically a technique to be able to guide these models to be able to generate the desired outputs better. And different AI models have different techniques that you have to put. For example, the prompts that you put into ChatGPT are not always going to be the same as the prompts that you put into Amazon services, for example, or Google's AI services. So it really is a lot of experimentation to be able to do that. And you'll be able to do this through crafting specific instructions or queries. In general, the best practice is always to specify everything as much as possible so that your prompt is not open to interpretation. And you'll be able to enable better control over AI behavior and hence enhance the model performance better that way too, and better suit your use cases. So let's take a bit of some example prompts. So these might be prompts that you use within ChatGPT, for example, or a similar interface. So for example, I could say, using historical project data provided as, and you can provide your data here basically as part of that, because now they allow uploads of images, for example, on the GPT interface. Or you could also just put your data directly there as well. Generate a range of scenarios to identify optimal resource allocation strategies for achieving project milestones under varying conditions. On the other hand, you could also do something like perform a cost-benefit analysis to compare different resource allocation strategies, highlighting the trade-offs and potential impacts on project outcomes. Again, I'd like to put a note of caution here of putting personal data directly within, for example, public interfaces like ChatGPT, but I will touch on that later when I touch on the ethics section. And accordingly, what you can do after that is that you can continually ask it to refine the prompt. You can ask the Gen AI to iteratively develop the response based on a previous response, such as, for example, saying, based on a previous cost-benefit analysis, further provide insights that will allow to make better analysis. So you're asking it to take into account what you previously put in, and you're asking it to output something better out of that. And you can do this by either just asking it for a better output, a different output that would suit your best use cases better, or you could feed it new data and say, all right, based on this new data, provide me a new way of a better output based on incorporating what I have just put in. So that's how we are able to refine prompts accordingly. So let's get into a bit of use case with risk assessment. So as project managers, I'm sure that most people here are already quite familiar with risk management within project management. And some aspects of that include being able to quantify risks accordingly and propose mitigations accordingly. So one of the things, for example, that we can actually take a look at is variations in resource costs, unexpected expenses, and changes in scope. So those are all pretty much common risks that we have faced as product managers. And we can actually also categorize this on a risk assessment matrix. So this should look pretty familiar. So we have high likelihood, high impact, high likelihood, low impact, so and et cetera, et cetera. So it's able to categorize these into quadrants essentially based on the impact. So let's, for example, have this calculated risk. Let's say we have a data based on this risk that we have for our project. So we have a few scenarios, and as you can see, these are risks that I didn't specifically quantify directly, or as in I didn't describe directly, but we're using these scenarios as an example, and we're putting a probability to each of them, and we have an impact. And as part of that, we ask it to calculate the impact, the expected impact. So expected impact is basically just the impact multiplied by the probability. So we can ask the AI to directly calculate that for us, basically. So that's part of the automation process. And what it can then do as well is that it can also help us visualize the risk as well. So this is an example of a normalized risk, and this was actually generated as well based on the data that I provided to earlier. So for example, this was generated by ChatGPT, and it was able to generate directly the histogram of impact and be able to plot frequency against impact and normalize the data accordingly, and also provide a box plot of impact. So as you can see, this is helping us to be able to quantify risks a bit better and understand the impact and the severity and where the majority of scenarios actually lie within this case. And as we can see, for example, there are a lot of risks that actually fall within the high impact category, as we can see here. And we can see if there are outliers too within the box plot. And these are sample insights that are actually generated based on putting them into GPT. So we can see, for example, that initially when I provide the prompt, I represented scenario B as a major IT firm overhaul, and scenario C, for example, as entering a new market, which has, well, as you can see, it's definitely a risky scenario, and it has a potential of a lot of fierce competition that can actually have result as part of that. So as part of that, you can see that it's able to provide recommendations accordingly. And these are recommendations that are provided based on insights of data I provided previously. But what it does is that it's able to use general knowledge that it has been trained on to also provide general best practice too. So for example, it can say, for these high priority risks, the organization invests in detailed strategic planning, robust financial modeling, and market analysis. It implements phased rollouts, diversifies investment, and sets aside contingency funds. So it's able to give some good feedback. And mind you, this is still pretty much just giving it quite a vague prompt because I wanted to see what kind of insight it's able to generate. But if you are provide a more detailed prompt, for example, say based on, all right, I have this particular scenario and these are the considerations I have, and these are the benefits, and these are the disadvantages. And based on that, it can definitely generate a more detailed outcome based on that and provide better insights based on that too. So this is basically just a generic model of it, as you can see. And as you can see with the other sample insights as well, it's also able to accordingly provide some recommendations. So you can see that, for example, scenario A is about routine software updates, D is about natural disaster, and you can see that it's able to provide mitigation responses, or it's also able to consider if we actually need a regular risk assessment. So as you can see, some of these have bigger mitigations than others. Others are simply just more of a wait and see kind of impact. So it's definitely dependent on the specifications that we provide to it, and also based on the scenarios that are provided to it. So as you can see, there's quite a bit of potential within being able to provide these kinds of insights. And I'd like to make a specific note as well on decision making with AI. A lot of it is going to be data driven. As you can see before, we have a lot of data, and what we want to do is that we want to use that data to be able to build good scenarios and be able to build further considerations that we can take into account while we look into this further. And we also need to be able to make this in conjunction with human intervention. And that is the main note I would like to make out of this, because at the end of the day, it's always going to still require humans. AI is always going to be powerful in generating insights, but we need to make sure that everything still has a human in the loop, and instead have the AI act as an assistant or a co-pilot instead, so that you're able to power these insights, helping you, but at the same time, you're still in charge of making sure that everything is going as you have planned it to. And as part of that, if you want to drive this kind of initiative, you need to also look into building a AI conscious project management culture, which is really based on 5 main aspects. These 5 aspects are awareness in education, collaborative learning, adaptive methodologies, continuous improvement, and stakeholder engagement. Awareness in education, because you need to be able to continually see where it's currently being used in your organization and how you're currently using it as well. You need to be also able to understand that these kind of technologies need some time to develop and adapt. For example, PMI has been doing a great job at educating a lot of project managers with their latest course with generative AI for project managers. I took the course as well, and I thought it was a great initiative from them. And I think that is definitely one of the things that should be looked into as well within a lot of organizations for project managers. So really, it's a lot in general for being able to build your skills within the area. And collaborative learning is another thing. To be able to have and encourage learning in groups and have that knowledge sharing to be able to perform the tasks that you need to be able to do is a very important thing. Adaptive methodologies, because need to be able to have an agile culture of being able to adapt to things quickly and accordingly refine your knowledge based on what you currently already encountered. Continuous improvement, based on continually trying to see where you can improve in your organization and where this can actually help your organization. And finally, stakeholder engagement, because you need to be able to keep everyone updated based on what you're currently doing and accordingly develop a communications plan accordingly, and see which stakeholders might actually not really go for this particular approach, or if you actually need to further get more management approval based on this. So it's definitely dependent on a lot of things, and stakeholders are a very important thing when you actually try to implement this kind of thing. So we can then implement a project management flow, which can be based on these 5 main phases. And this is actually also considering the phases that project management phases in the PMBOK as well. So really, when we implement these kind of thing, it's really going to be based on these 5 phases: initiation, planning, execution, monitoring, controlling, and closing. So initiation initially is when we start off trying to build off the initial flow of this particular new tool to be able to incorporate. We need to be able to see where we can start implementing this into the project. When we reach the planning phase, we need to start thinking about, so where do we want to incorporate this? What phases of the project do we feel this is necessary, and how do we see this as a good tool? And do we see that we need any budget constraints as part of this? Or what necessary education do we need as part of this, and allocate resources accordingly based on that. When it comes to execution, then we start actually putting into motion. And as you already know as well, and some practitioners may already find this in their work as well when they're trying out using, for example, ChatGPT, but you'll essentially start using it as a companion tool while you're executing your projects day to day. So you're basically just gonna look up resources and do it on the go. So it becomes an integrated part of projects that way. And monitoring and controlling, you start to more or less see what you're currently doing based on the execution you've done, and what you're going to do with that. And where AI plays a role in that later is that you're going to be continually using that to see where you can continually optimize based on what you currently have, and how can you control costs accordingly too. And like I mentioned before, with risk management and cost optimization, for example. And finally, we close off. So we then can look into bringing AI, ASP to the firm, and how we can do this. It's particularly based on 5 different factors when we actually try to bring it to the firm. So first factor is value proposition. So really seeing where this brings value into your projects. And as I mentioned before, it has a lot of potential value. Being able to generate insights for you, being able to generate visualizations for you. It, in general, is able to help you both be more productive in what you do and also be more accurate in what you do. So it's important to be able to understand the value proposition that this kind of technology brings to the firm. Time optimization is another big factor because it's able to help you optimize your time better and let you work on the human-based stuff rather than the stuff that you can actually optimize and automate. Data-driven decisions, because you can make decisions based on the data that you feed into that and get the insights out of that too. And automatically, you need to be able to ensure that you put this forward as well when you bring this to the firm. Competitive advantage, because it's still a relatively new technology and a lot of people are still looking into it. So it's a great thing to be able to pitch in terms of being able to get ahead of the competition. We're already implementing it in terms of project management. And finally, just make the pitch based on that. So let's look at a case study, for example, in this scenario. So in this case, there might be a challenge that we need to be able to quickly adapt to changing supply chain dynamics and customer demands in a case of changing products, for example. Or it might be because there is a link that might actually no longer be there because, say, a supplier decided to no longer supply us with, well, our products. But the solution for this is that we can actually implement this, and how we can work out is that we can integrate the existing data systems for real-time input. And as I mentioned before, this can all be integrated into a workflow. So you can integrate this particular implementation into what our existing systems. And what it can do is then later it can propose scenarios based on what our current trends are and what the historical data is. And we can then train the necessary personnel to be able to adjust variables and interpret possible outcomes. And I'll show a bit of an example as well in the next few slides too of this. And the outcome of this, for example, is that we can reduce time to strategize from weeks to days because we are automating the process and we're really trying to optimize the time. And instead of doing it manually, we can instead make sure that it's accurate by feeding it to the generative AI, let it do data analysis for us, and it provides us the necessary insights based on that. And it increased the accurate forecasting in this case by 25%. And accordingly, is able to also enhance the team's ability to preemptively manage risks. So let's take, for example, this mock data that I created. This is sample data basically based on, let's say, 5 different resources. We have base cost and base time. So let's say the time, for example, is within, let's say, years. So base cost might be in terms of, let's say, dollars. So we can see that this is some sample data that we have. And what it can later do is that we can actually have a sample scenario where it's able to generate us scenarios based on different risk factors that we want it to be able to adapt. So for example, in this case, I want to be able to generate an optimistic case scenario. So what I then asked it to do is that I want to be able to provide me recommendations based on the data I provided it. And I wanted to be able to provide it in the optimistic sense. So assuming that everything goes well and is essentially just a bit more progressive in that sense. So I asked it to provide me recommendations based on that. So as you can see, it provides me recommendations based on everything that it provides so far. And we can see that some of the things are, it can suggest us aspects and considerations based on budget management. So we can see, calculate the total project cost. And it says, yeah, continually monitoring the project budget would be necessary to avoid overspending and technology and software. And yeah, time management, it calculates as well the 24 months to be able to do that. So, and we can see in terms of risk management, for example, it says that risks might be considered less likely, but it's important to plan for them. And yeah, in this case, it's another vague scenario. So they're not providing really detailed insights, but this is just an example of what insights can extract from the prompt that you provided. And as you can see, I didn't provide it too much, but it's able to generate great insights from this and recommend different aspects of your project management accordingly. So team management, quality control, stakeholder management, all that can generate insights from that. And as you provide more information and context to it, it'll be able to provide much better insights on that and accordingly provide you better feedback too. And we can also see another scenario, for example, a pessimistic scenario. And in this case, it can say that it might imply a high level of risk or uncertainty, and it directly just recommends a thorough risk assessment. And if you notice, it adjusts the time accordingly too. So it can actually adjust the cost and time accordingly based on your scenario. So in the worst case scenario, you can see it assumes a higher time than usual. So you can see that it's able to adjust the time and the cost accordingly based on that too. And you can see that it clearly is able to provide a higher project timeline compared to before. This one says 24 months, but this one says 36 months based on the data I provided it. So you can see that it's able to consider these particular outcomes and put them accordingly to be able to consider what to be able to do as part of the project scenario management. So what did we learn from this? We learned that there can be more seamless integration with existing systems, that Gen AI is able to facilitate creation of more diverse range of planning and scenarios. We're also able to educate stakeholders better on AI tools to be able to enhance strategic decision making. You can adopt AI as well to be able to decrease strategic planning cycles, and ultimately, you'll able to utilize AI for forecasting, which can lead to substantial improvements for accuracy. Because as you can see, this is performed not only in a generative sense. About 1 year ago, generative AI is still in a state where it's not exactly stable and it makes many mistakes in calculations, for example. But now, with the state of generative AI now, it's able to perform data analysis directly within its UI as well. And hence, it's able to directly perform these calculations by just typing in a few sentences. And that's really the main thing why it's very powerful for project managers to actually look into, because it's just a very powerful venue. We don't even need to worry too much about accuracy anymore. Well, we still need to monitor it regardless, but it's just became much more accurate over time. Now, ethics and considerations. I'd like to put special emphasis on this slide because what I've talked about so far has been on the optimistic side of things. And I'm sure that some project managers are already ready to raise this particular concern as well. But data privacy is a big concern within the space currently in generative AI usage. Now, there are always a lot of concerns, for example, in saying, like, don't put your private data into the ChatGPT interface directly, which I completely agree with. You should not do that. But instead, you should look into the different terms and conditions of these services. Like, for example, if you were to access ChatGPT from its API, they then say that, okay, we will keep your data private. So you need to be able to ensure that you understand the terms and conditions and what they do with your data based on where you're using it before you actually use this kind of service. So you need to be able to ensure that you understand that. And it's not only ChatGPT, every service like Amazon Bedrock, which is Amazon service offering, or Google's own offering, you need to be able to understand that properly before you implement this into your workflow as project managers. And aside from that, understand that there is also the potential for bias to happen. And if you've been playing around with ChatGPT for a while, you know that it is prone to hallucinations. And what I mean by hallucinations is that it might suggest things that might not actually be true. So this is a common thing that happens from time to time. And you need to that's why it's very important to be able to have the human in the loop continuously to monitor these kinds of scenarios and prevent it from happening. Transparency is another important consideration because you need to ensure that you are also transparent about what you're currently doing with it and ensure that everyone on board, stakeholders, also know where we are taking this particular technology and how we're using it. And the last two things is pretty much stakeholder communication. Firstly, because you need to be able to understand how stakeholders are using it too, as I mentioned before. And finally, understand how you're using it complies with regulations as well. Right now, a lot of regulations, whether it be in Indonesia or in other countries as well, regulations are still a bit lagging behind this technology, and they're still figuring out the best way of regulating things. So it might change over time, but it's important to ensure that what you're doing and how you're using this also conforms to regulations, both internally within your company and organization and externally within the country-wise as well, and like how you're currently adapting to the laws that are necessary to the works that you're currently performing. And towards the future, there's definitely going to be more automation workflow. We're going to definitely see more development in that, and more organizations are starting to implement that and see better workflows developed. And in general, it's going to make project managers' lives a lot easier. It's going to be more correct AI to make decisions. What I mean by more correct is that AI is going to develop much more than now. We've already seen a big leap from AI struggling to do a basic maths 1+1, generative AI that is, because previously generative AI was only able to generate textual insights. It's only able to, for example, say, all right, like, write me a random poem, and it's able to generate that. So but it's not optimized for doing maths, for example. Now it's able to. It's able to do these data analytics inside and actually generate you that, and even generate you the code that it did to perform this data analysis as well. So it's already gone a long way, and I foresee that it's going to be continually a bigger topic moving forwards. And that's why it's imperative for project managers to definitely start looking into technology more and looking how they can utilize this as part of their workflows, because it doesn't even need that much technical knowledge. As far as I mean, as people who have already used ChatGPT know, it's basically just spinning up ChatGPT, for example, and just inputting directly a few commands into it. Of course, you still need to consider data privacy and understand the ramifications of doing that, but that's just shows how easy it is now to be able to generate insights from these kinds of technologies. And finally, there's going to be more optimization that can be done based on this. So what are further resources you can learn about generative AI and project management? Firstly, I'd like to recommend the PMI Generative AI for Product Managers course. I think I've seen a lot of my product manager connections who've already utilized this as well, who've already looked into this as well. It's one of, I feel like it's PMI's first offering, and I'm glad that they're starting to go into this curve as well. And aside from that, I think it's always good to look at documentation if you're looking into utilizing these. For example, for ChatGPT, seeing the data privacy terms and conditions, seeing how you're utilizing it, and learn more from that as well. Because oftentimes you don't need to learn about the technical stuff related to that, but you can basically just learn how to, for example, like generate better prompts based on that. Like how can you make it generate you better insights based on what you currently already have. And for example, like I said, some of the tips I have, be specific, be directed better essentially on like what you want to do and provide context accordingly. So those are some key tips, but there are definitely a lot more. So it's always good to check the documentation as well to understand a bit more on like generating better prompts too. So key takeaways from this, there's going to be big potential, massive potential for generative AI for product managers in their planning, because as you can see, it's not only able to perform calculations from you based on your raw data, but it's also able to generate insights from that and recommend you analytics based on that. You're able to also then have AI assist you as your co-pilot. So again, I'd like to stress, make sure that you don't treat that as a see-all, know-all solution. Make sure that you still have a human in the loop to be able to ensure that you know that that AI is not the end of all means, essentially. So you need to treat it as your co-pilot instead, your assistant. And that way you can get the most out of it. And finally, of course, there's the more need for product managers to have AI knowledge. And when I mean AI knowledge, I don't mean you need to completely take like a core deep dive into AI or something like that. In general, just understand how to work more with ChatGPT, for example, or at least learn how to, for example, call its API or generate better prompts. Like in general, it's nothing too big, but in general, it's going to be a bigger thing for a lot of project managers. So it's definitely going to be something I'm going to be recommending as well for quite some time and continuing in the future, because I see that the potential for this within product management is massive. So that is all for me. Thank you for everyone for listening to the presentation. I hope that you managed to get some insights out of that. And I'd like to open the floor for questions.
Okay, very insightful presentation from Renaldi. For the attendance, if any question, please, or you can raise hand, then we can unmute.
Yep, I think we have a question there, Masario.
I think Pak Yofi raise hand. Pak Yofi,
Hello.
yeah.
Yeah, Pak Yofi.
Yeah. Good evening, Pak Renaldi.
Evening, Payofi.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I just want to ask about because right now AI is become must become more trustable. I mean, most of the people is trusting AI right now rather than people experience. The way I see it is like that. So, what do you think? I mean, how should we anticipate the situation? I mean, well, we are maybe we can say that we are experienced people. We have decision. I mean, we have experience to make a decision, but most of people is more trust with the AI. There's I think it's a little bit problem for us for the people. Yeah, that's my question. Maybe you have some advice, something.
So that's an interesting question, I think. And I think, yeah, going back to what I mentioned as well, it's definitely something that I recognize too. It's at the end of the day, AI should not be a see all, know all solution. It's definitely something that you need to be able to ensure that people understand that it is something that you should take with caution. So, one of the things that I think is the best way to approach this is you need to build a good culture that actually understands that within your organization. And what I mean by that is that you need to be able to ensure that people in the organization know not to trust AI fully, because at the end of the day, it's the generative AI is, it's definitely improved a lot, but it can still make mistakes. It's still prone to what we call hallucinations based on what, what like, yeah, what mistakes that can be made, and it sometimes can be misled by the prompt too, because it doesn't know everything. It is trained on a lot of data. It knows a lot of data, but it doesn't know everything. So I think that is the main consideration that you need to be able to put through in organizations. You need to be able to build that culture of making sure that people who are using that know that we can't trust it fully, and always have the human in the loop to check out what is currently being done.
So okay.
Thank you for the question, Ayofi. And I'd just like to make a quick note as well. If anyone wants to ask any question in Indonesian as well, I'm happy to answer those too. Okay, I think we have, yeah. Okay.
Aryan, maybe you want to open on unmute, Aryan, or we just read your.
Yep. Thank you. So, Pak Renaldi, thanks for your presentations. Yeah, it's very insightful, and yeah, getting a lot from your for your presentations here. So, the questions is using an AI, right? There's will involve a lot of costs. We can get the use of it, we can maximize it, we can optimize it, but again, cost, right? So, do you have any maybe experience, best practice on how usually, in your case, to manage the cost and to make sure that it's not out of budget or something like that?
That's a
Because
good question.
right, on AI it's like a token based, right? Yeah, and sometimes we cannot control of using it that. So yeah.
Yep, definitely. Thank you, Pak Rian, for the question. So it's a really interesting case, and it always differs as well based on the provider too. Like everyone has a different way of dealing with this. For example, when you go to ChatGPT or Amazon's own models, it's always going to be a question of that. Some best practice I can think of is that I personally always just monitor how the tokens are being used. Like basically, one of the ways I consider it is that you need to be able to consider how much tokens you need to use, for example. And I think, for those who are not too familiar with what tokens are, I think I'm just going to add this bit of clarity. Tokens are basically what you take up as part of executing foundational models, these particular like generative AI, and they are usually based on when you use the API, basically. So you can also basically kind of like customize your models appropriately based on this too. And what I particularly do for this is that I reduce particularly the tokens based on until like I reach the right level I want that. So the right level also always depends on a few things. Right level might depend on, for example, your usage or how many characters you want to generate and how much input you actually have to put in as well. So if you don't have to put in too much input, for example, you can reduce it, for example, to a low enough value so you can actually save costs. Like, for example, a lot of foundational models, you have 4,096 tokens, but you can actually reduce it to like, say, 500 or so. And you can actually still save a lot on cost that way too, because you'd be wasting unnecessary cost regardless. Another best practice I can think of is you just need to monitor proper how people are currently using Gen AI within your organization. Like, for example, if you're currently using like APIs and connecting it accordingly based on different people, because sometimes you can buy an enterprise-wide connection based on that, and based on that, you need to be able to control who's using what essentially, and accordingly make sure that you are keeping on track of what what people are using for what. Because sometimes one of the biggest risks I always see is that API keys might be, from a security perspective, it might actually be utilized. You might actually accidentally lose it and actually put it somewhere else in terms of it leaking out to the public, and it might actually be used by another person. And next thing you know, your API, like your costs actually go up very high. So that's just one of the cases that I see. But yeah, I think those two are quite best practices, I think, in my opinion. Keeping on track on like who's using your API keys when you're actually working with these kind of models, and also, being able to ensure better of like, what you're currently using it for and the number of tokens that you're currently consuming as part of that.
Okay, some kind of like a role access, what is it? Controls, right? So because again, based on my experience also here, right? We have the companies provide these kind of features to our employees, right? And they actually often excited on it. They actually often excited on using it. So they, not they, we are using it. Everything's sometimes it's not necessary to our daily work. Still using AI, and and the cost getting over budget, something like that. So got your insights, Pak Renaldi. Thanks.
No worries. Thanks as well, Paria, for the question. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, because I feel like most organizations right now, at least like where I currently am in Australia, is like everyone is approaching it with very high caution of using it, and they're being very cautious about it. So yeah, it's great to hear that. Yeah, like your organization is currently using it to a great degree, I think. Yeah.
And the next question, Renaldi.
Yep.
How can we ensure transparency in how AI make a decision?
So I feel that you need to understand a few things, I feel, when it comes to this way. So firstly, the first step I think is understanding how each AI actually works. So as I was mentioning before, ChatGPT might work in a different way, for example, than Amazon's AI models or Google's AI models. And based on that, it might generate things that are based on different prompts. Different prompts might generate different things essentially, based on each different AI. And one of the ways to be able to ensure transparency is being able to get a better understanding of that first before approaching it further. After that, it's really being able to feed it with enough context so that it can actually provide you enough information. And when it provides you decisions, oftentimes I always find it a good practice to always ask it as well, please justify why you make this decision too, because sometimes even without you saying it, they will justify as well what kind of considerations they already put into place. But oftentimes they just try to make it as concise as possible. Like for example, ChatGPT. If you've played around with the ChatGPT 4 model before, which is their latest model, you know that they are a bit strict on that in terms of conciseness. So they try to make the response as concise as possible. So oftentimes they'll try to skip explaining things if they don't need to. So you could actually just also say, why did you make this decision? And it'll more or less give you the full rationale of why it makes decisions based on that. So I feel like that's the next step of being able to ensure that it is transparent about its decisions. You ask it to essentially be transparent that way by explaining that rationale. And finally, I feel that with that, you need to evaluate the responses accordingly too. You need to see how, for example, one response might differ to another. So with the thing about generative AI as well is that oftentimes you will see that you'll never get one response, and that's just a trait of generative AI. It'll always give you a different response, but oftentimes if it's based on the data and with how far Gen AI has advanced now, the only thing that will differ is most likely just going to be its wording of things. The insights it generates, the calculations, it's more or less going to be accurate. So I'm saying that take it with a grain of salt, because sometimes it might still make mistakes. But that being said, that's again why we need to have a human in the loop to make sure that the decisions are actually make sense. So yeah, so pretty much like wrapping it up, like those 3 steps are what I would take to ensure transparency in how AI makes decisions, and still keep it human in the loop anyway to ensure that the decision that is made actually does make sense, and overall, yeah, ensures that they understand as well why the decision is made to make sure that it is transparent. No worries. Thank you, I guess, well, for the question. Yeah, just putting a note as well. If anyone wants to ask questions in Indonesian as well, I'm happy to answer questions in Indonesians too.
Ya, buat rekan-rekan, mungkin kalau ada pertanyaan lagi, Pak Renaldi, nggak masalah kalau pertanyaannya ditanyakan pakai bahasa Indonesia.
Iya, nggak apa-apa kalau mau tanya bahasa Indonesia, saya bisa jawab juga.
Mungkin dari saya ya, Pak Rinaldi. Misalnya, apakah AI itu cukup aman buat kita sebagai misalnya kita sebagai company mau menggunakan AI buat risk mitigation atau strategi perusahaan, dan di saat yang sama kompetitor kita pakai AI yang sama. Apakah ada kemungkinan buat data kita jadinya bocor atau strategi kita jadinya dijual sama AI ke kompetitor.
Buat question ini saya rasa sih saya ada apa namanya ada cerita yang lumayan menarik sih. Soalnya dulu saya ada tahu ada orang dari perusahaan lain pernah saya bicara tentang ini juga dan interestingly mereka ditanyain mereka sempat coba tanya bagaimana ya ini uh, ide ini kalau misalnya kita ide 10 tahun ke depannya gimana gitu loh. Terus interestingnya itu ide yang disampaikan dengan ChatGPT misalnya itu juga ternyata align dengan ide mereka juga. Jadi sebenarnya interesting juga pertanyaan ini. Tapi ini juga sebenarnya sudah sempat dibicarakan juga dalam beberapa diskusi juga sih apa namanya tentang siapa yang akhirnya dapat datanya itu loh apa namanya kalau misalnya karena misalnya ChatGPT itu banyak disponsorin sama Microsoft gitu loh. Jadi misalnya masa dibiayain sama Microsoft. Jadi kalau gitu berarti Microsoft yang dapat datanya bukan. Jadi itu ada beberapa pertanyaan tentang itu juga. Dan menurut saya sih sebenarnya sih itu saya sih nggak kerja di open AI. Jadi saya itu nggak bisa ngomong for sure. Tapi setahu saya itu biasanya itu orang itu adapt pakai terms and conditions-nya aja sih. Jadi biasanya melalui itu sih biasanya sih udah tahu bahwa dari situ itu mereka itu juga harus ikuti peraturannya juga. Jadi sebenarnya nggak bisa gitu deviasi juga sih. Jadi kalau AI aman atau enggak sih sebenarnya sih saya selalu bilangnya sih oleh ngertiin area-area pakai itu juga di mana. Soalnya kayak saya tadi juga ngomong juga di presentasi saya juga itu beberapa praktis itu juga perlu diperhatiin karena misalnya kalau personal data data pribadi itu nggak boleh langsung misalnya dimasukin ke dalam ChatGPT langsung gitu loh. Itu makanya itu perlu belajar gimana cara pakai API-nya buat karena di terms and conditions mereka juga ngomongnya dari API-nya itu eh, mereka itu proyeknya itu yang bisa nggak di nggak di datanya nggak dipakai buat train data lain gitu loh. Jadi ya mereka dari situ itu kalau pakai API itu yang datanya itu jadi ya mereka itu nggak boleh ambil data orang lain. Jadi kalau dari situ itu bisa ngertiin bagaimana cara pakainya itu apa namanya dengan aman. Jadi sebenarnya itu jadi balik lagi ke pertanyaannya itu bagusnya itu buat ngertiin bagaimana pakai uh, ini dengan aman dan ngertiin best practices-nya bagaimana pakainya buat uh, buat ya biar pakai dengan aman di organisasi dan juga saya juga mau nekenin lagi itu pentingnya buat develop guidelines buat pakai uh, teknologi ini di dalam setiap organisasi. Karena misalnya dalam organisasi saya saja sampai sekarang aja kita masih treat AI itu dengan hati-hati. Kita establish guidelines buat memakai AI. Jadi kita ada kayak ada ya guidelines buat pakai AI itu mesti gimana, apa namanya, mesti dimengertiinnya gimana. Jadi itu biasanya penting banget itu buat dimengertiin bagaimana pakai ini dan establishing guidelines buat mengerti penggunaan pakainya biar orang nggak salah misalnya kayak masukin data pribadi ke dalam ChatGPT punya public ya website gitu itu penting buat di ngertiin.
Thank you. Harus memang ada guideline ya buat penggunaan AI ini.
Bener Pak.
Ini ada pertanyaan berikutnya. Seberapa besar kemungkinan AI yang akan menggantikan pekerjaan, terutama role di project manager?
Saya rasa sih ini pertanyaan lumayan hot topic juga ini. Banyak ada pertanyaan-pertanyaan yang tanyain ini juga kayaknya in general. Jadi menurut saya sih, saya nggak rasa ini bakal menggantiin project manager role. Saya rasa ini bakal memerlukan diversifikasi dari project manager role. Seperti saya tadi ngomongin, misalnya PMI sekarang udah mulai keluarin course yang ya Generative AI for Project Managers itu, dan saya rasa itu juga karena mereka udah mulai merasa bahwa ini sesuatu yang penting buat project manager mulai mengertiin. Sekarang teknologi masih baru, jadi belum banyak orang pakai, tapi eventually kita ngomong misalnya kayak 3-5 tahun sampai sekarang, dari sekarang bakal banyak yang pakai, pasti bakal banyak yang pakai buat competitive advantage. Jadi banyak orang mulai bakal pakai karena mereka itu bisa dapat results yang lebih cepat dan juga bisa suggest solution yang beda-beda buat buat project manager yang beda-beda juga, dan itu juga bisa bikin proses-prosesnya lebih efisien. Jadi itu bisa membantu dalam seperti saya tadi katakan, itu bisa membantu dalam semua fase-fase project management, initiation, planning, execution, itu dia bisa integrasi dalam semua fase-fase itu. Jadi saya rasa itu sebenarnya itu cuman nggak bakal menggantikan banyak sih kalau project manager itu, tapi bagaimana menggunakannya saya rasa bakal menjadi hal yang sangat penting over time. Kalau pekerjaan lain sama juga sama pekerjaan lain juga. Saya rasa juga pekerjaan lain itu nggak bakal banyak pengurangan seperti banyak orang takuti sih saya rasa. Soalnya over time itu pekerjaan itu cuma bakal akhirnya dapetin dapetin skill-skill baru. Jadi buat bisa mengembangkan penggunaan mereka untuk AI. Karena bakal banyak orang juga mulai melihat ke area situ juga, dan itu juga akhirnya bakal mengembangkan posisi-posisi baru. Misalnya sekarang saya udah mulai melihat mulai banyak ada kata-kata katanya misalnya kayak general manager of AI gitu loh, atau solusi yang beda-beda. Jadi sebenarnya sih tergantung itu juga. Dan saya sih rasa sih saya bakal kayak gitu, nggak bakal begitu menggantikan kerjaan, tapi bakal diversifikasi role-nya.
Oke, justru kalau saat ini situasinya AI ini justru jadi asisten ya, lebih mempermudah, lebih menjadikan lebih produktif buat apa teman-teman di project manager ya.
Benar, dan ya itu yang
Sehingga
saya katakan juga. Makanya pentingnya itu buat project manager itu ya pakai AI bukan sebagai apa namanya, kayak itu bukan kayak apa namanya CEO barunya gitu
cheat.
loh. Itu bukan CEO baru, itu bukan direktur baru, itu cuman sebagai asisten yang buat membantu buat ya apa namanya bisa bantuin bikin decision, bukan buat bikin decisionnya sendiri. Dan makanya itu 3-5 tahun sekarang, walaupun udah banyak diadaptasi, tetap aja selalu bakal ada tetap aja ya human in the loop, masa ada manusia yang tetap aja perlu
Oke.
di belakangnya.
Oke, buat rekan-rekan yang lain mungkin masih ada pertanyaan terkait AI. Berarti like dicoba juga nih course-nya yang dari PMI mengenai generative AI ya.
Iya, itu juga bakal terus-terusan dikembangin sih. Itu kayak itu course-nya sih masih lumayan um, high level sih menurut saya. Maksudnya masih general, tapi saya rasa sih nanti bakal dikembangin juga biar lebih banyak insights-nya juga kayak saya rasa.
Oke, masih ada pertanyaan dari teman-teman? Ini soalnya apa, Mas Rinaldinya juga posisinya di Melbourne ini sudah apa, lumayan tengah malam juga. Kalau nggak ada pertanyaan lagi, mungkin kita apa, sebelum kita tutup sesi ini kita dokumentasi dulu ya foto-foto. Terima kasih banyak Mas Rinaldi atas sharingnya pada malam hari ini. Sangat insightful buat kita semua. Mungkin untuk teman-teman attendance bisa open cam sebentar biar
Oke,
kita ambil dokumentasi.
Mas Renaldi mungkin bisa stop sharing dulu biar saya bisa.
Oke, sip.
Oke.
Atau masih ada yang mau say hello dulu dengan Mas Renaldi?
Mungkin bisa mau ngobrol-ngobrol dulu. Ada kesempatan sembari saya capture dokumentasi.
Oke, boleh apa di open cam buat teman-teman. Bentar lagi dari Bang Raisuli ambil gambar buat dokumentasi.
Ya mungkin sudah dari saya.
Oh, sudah.
Ya.
Oke, itu saja kalau nggak ada ini lagi dari teman-teman. Thank you. Terima kasih banyak
Terima kasih
Mas
Pak
Aldi.
Renaldi,
Sehat
terima
selalu
kasih.
buat Mas Renaldi.
Terima kasih juga.
Mungkin apa ditunggu buat sharing-sharing selanjutnya mengenai AI atau cloud. Thank you
Sip.
ya.
Oke, selamat malam
Ya,
semua. Terima kasih.
thank you semua. Selamat malam semua.
Terima kasih semua.
Terima kasih semua. Meetingnya saya close ya. Sessionnya. Terima kasih. Selamat malam.